tourism research at York St John, we have a small but growing tourism research group within the business school. And I was pleased that for the first time this ref cycle, we were an impact case study that contributed to our overall submission within the department, which was good. So we've got a growing research culture within tourism within the school. And we've recently been joined by Professor John Try, which I'm sure some of you will know, who's joined us at York St John, to lead on helping to develop a research culture within the business school generally, but then more specifically to work with us on the tourism research side as well. And as mentioned, my main areas of interest concern destination management, governance, public policy, placemaking, and in particular engagement models and methods in decision making around tourism development and destination management. I've been involved with TEFI since 2011, which is the Tourism Education Futures Initiative, which I'm sure some of you are aware of. We were asked to host their conference at York St John, which we held last June. We were planning to have it in York, but obviously the pandemic meant that we had to move that online. And that happened sort of June last year. We had sort of 3 days of an online conference, which went well, given that we only had a couple of months to turn it from a in-person event to an online event. And as a consequence of that, myself and my colleague over at the University of Waterloo, Carla Bollock, we took over as co-chairs of TEFI in January of this year. I'll say a little bit more about TEFI a bit later on. And some activities that we've been working on, and hope that you might be interested in getting involved as well. And then also this year, I took on the chair of the Tourism Advisory Board in the City of York. That's a new board that was created in partnership with the City of York Council, but also Make It York, the DMO in the city. And it's quite an interesting approach. The first time York's ever had that type of engagement model, trying to bring together a range of different stakeholders from across the city and the wider region with a remit to keep the DMO and the council accountable for tourism policy and strategy. There was a previous board, but that sat within the DMO, so it was very exclusive, whereas this new board is much more open and diverse and had much more wider engagement. So we have a monthly meeting, which is actually working really well on Zoom, getting everyone together, primarily looking at the recovery post-pandemic in York for tourism, but with a wider, longer-term remit of looking at tourism strategy going forward. So as I mentioned, part of the reason for my talk was following the TEFI conference that we held at York St John last June, and that's led to the theme of that conference was what's tourism got to do with it, repurposing tourism, engaging our radical in tourism education. And we had about 40 speakers from across the world. And one of the good things about the pandemic and moving online was meant that the conference became much more accessible to people who weren't able to travel to York but could engage online. And that's really that theme we've taken forward in terms of a research agenda within the department, and it's sort of building on what I want to talk to you today. So just to give a bit about background and outline to the presentation this afternoon, I'd like to explore the following, really. First of all, to kind of set the scene in some context, which we're all very familiar with, some of the key challenges that are currently facing tourism, but specifically over tourism, climate change, employability in tourism, and of course, COVID-19, because this provides some helpful context to the topic that I'd like to go on to explore, which is the notion of the purpose economy and how this could be applied to tourism for a more sustainable future as a subject, as an industry. And then finally look at some examples of how purposeful tourism could work in practice, and in particular a project that we're working on within the research group at York St John around purposeful tourism within the context of York. So that's the plan, and I think I've got we've only got an hour, so I'll make sure there's time for questions at the end as well. So just to provide some context then, as we're all profoundly aware, COVID-19 has brought the world to a standstill, and tourism is one of the worst affected economic sectors. And although many countries are now reopening to visitors, I think the impact of the pandemic is likely to be felt for many years to come. But even before COVID-19, there were urgent concerns about the economic, the social, the environmental, the cultural impacts of tourism. And awareness has been growing around the environmental sustainability of tourism, whether that's overconsumption of precious resources, over-tourism and the anti-tourism sentiment. And we're all familiar with scenes like this and the implications and the impacts and the causes for concern that brings, or the climate crisis and the destructive impact on natural habitats. Tourism can put enormous strains on destination communities. There's also the quality of employment in tourism is also an area of concern. As we know, tourism is very labour intensive, but also a significant source of employability. But there are concerns about and challenges about employability in tourism, with poor quality employment contributing to social and economic inequalities. So issues such as poor pay and working conditions, sexual harassment, discrimination, unequal treatment, low education and training, a rigid corporate culture, seasonality, political instability, and high employee turnover are all areas of concern. And of course, the pandemic is being felt throughout the entire tourism ecosystem. And the reopening and rebuilding of destinations will require a joined up approach. I mean, for me, I think looking ahead, the measures we put in place today will certainly shape the future of tourism tomorrow. And government, whether that be international, national, local or regional, need to already consider the longer term implications of the crisis. But while staying ahead of the digital curve, supporting the low carbon transition and promoting the structural transformation needed to build a stronger, more sustainable, but also more resilient tourism economy. So whether it's over tourism, the climate crisis, the quality of work, COVID-19, or other ethical, social, environmental, or economic concerns, if the unsustainable nature of tourism is to be addressed, then the unlocking of the industry is an opportunity, I think, to think radically about the purpose of tourism for a more sustainable future. And striving to achieve a balance between development and sustainability is at the forefront of that debate. As practitioners, as scholars, as travellers, we begin to challenge the purpose of tourism. And I would argue that this is an opportunity coming out of the pandemic to really rethink tourism for a more sustainable future. So the impact of COVID does offer an opportunity to rebuild tourism in a more purposeful way and to address some of the long-standing concerns that we've just explored, and to support the renewal of tourism following the pandemic. We need to radically challenge the purpose, the role, the function of tourism, what that means and what impact that had. And when we think about this notion of purpose, purpose is what motivates us. It's the reason why we do things. It's why tourism operators continue to open their doors. It's why workers turn up for their shifts, and it's why organisations and governments do what they do. And understanding our purpose and those of others provides an opportunity to find common ground. And I think if we're going to address these concerns regarding tourism, we need to think radically and differently about how tourism operates going forward. We all have a responsibility regarding minimising the negative impacts of tourism, whether we are a tourist, whether we work in tourism or in local government, if we're a tour operator, a local resident, an NGO. We should take responsibility for our behaviour and actions and the impact that they have on destinations and on host communities and on organisations that work within those destinations. So purposeful tourism then, I would argue, is about creating sustainable places to live, work and visit. That's based on creating value that is more than just the pursuit of profit. And building on that, one approach that I feel can really help tourism work towards a more sustainable future, a more positive future, is that of the purpose economy. And this was the theme that we built the TEPI conference around last June. So the purpose economy, some of you may be very familiar with, but if not, it was a concept devised by Aaron Hurst to describe the way in which work is changing, to reflect the desire amongst employees to realise a higher societal purpose in their work. What Aaron realised is that the quest for purpose and self-expression is changing and reshaping the workplace and the roles that we do and roles that we undertake. What's argued here is that we're looking for a sense of purpose in our lives, and given that work shapes a large part of our modern identity, this is translated to wanting a career with purpose. So, for example, not only do we want to serve dinner or provide a guided tour, but we want to feel good about doing that as well. And what Hurst suggests is that purpose-centered professionals not only want more satisfying careers, but they also want to contribute more productively to teams and organisations. And what he's proposing here is a new view of success, which is based on relationships, impact, as well as growth. And it's this quest for purpose and self-expression in the workplace, and it's reshaping corporate behaviour and creating new economic opportunities. Aaron Hurst's theory of the purpose economy suggests that companies will be most successful in the longer term if they have a very clear sense of collective purpose where everyone benefits. And to sort of quote Aaron directly, he defines the purpose economy as an economy that is driven and organised around the creation of purpose for people, not just information, goods and services. And that really taps into our intrinsic desire for meaning in our work, but also in life as well. So the purpose economy then is one that fosters the flow of good ideas. It's about creating positive and impactful services and products, and ultimately a more efficient way to spread good in the world. And for Aaron in particular, purpose is about action for social change, driven by innovation in research, in policy making, in public perception, but also within disruptive technology as well. So when we apply these features of the purpose economy to tourism, I would argue that we begin to move towards a more purposeful and sustainable form of tourism. So sustainable tourism is about creating sustainable places to visit, to work, to live, which is about creating value that's more than just that pursuit for profit. Purpose is intentional, and it requires a commitment to learning and being reflective about our decisions, our behaviours, and the choices that we make. So, for example, a purposeful tourist must be honest and demonstrate restraint regarding the amount and types of travel that they choose to embark on. A for-purpose business strives to deliver more than just profit, often delivering social, cultural, economic and environmental benefits because it's the right thing to do. And travelling in a more purposeful way is more likely to help support local people in destination communities. It also helps to contribute to a future where tourism is less harmful as well. And Carla and I actually wrote a piece for the conversation where we sort of had 5 top tips on how to travel more purposefully and how to kind of give back to local communities, building on the themes that emerged from the conference and on this notion of purposeful tourism. And I've got some examples of this in practice as well. And the 2 examples I want to share really kind of build on those principles of purposeful tourism, of the purpose economy, and demonstrate that urgent need to move beyond the business as usual approaches. So the 2 examples to sort of share with you this afternoon are Adventure Alternative and the charity Moving Mountains, two organisations that really foster the values of purposeful tourism. Both were founded by Gavin Bate and focus on the connection between social enterprise, sustainable tourism and international development. Gavin actually was one of our keynote speakers at the conference last June and gave a brilliant presentation, which is available. I can share it with everyone if they're interested afterwards. He gave a video, created a video for his presentation, which is available on YouTube. I can certainly share the link. But Adventure Alternative, it's founded, I think, in 1991, is an adventure travel company. But their ethos is based on the connection between social enterprise and sustainable tourism, but with a particular focus on fair and just employment practices. And then alongside that, the charity Moving Mountains reflects a strategy that is based on a model of social enterprise that reconciles profit with poverty reduction, capitalism with compassion, and corporate responsibility with community ownership. And elements of that strategic approach are really reflected and embedded within the organisation through the use of impact mapping. And that focuses on sustainability of projects so that communities don't become complacent or reliant and instead move towards self-sufficiency. So the work that Gavin has done really embraces local empowerment, whereby partners in places such as Kenya and Nepal, where they've primarily worked, are equipped with the means to set up their own local Moving Mountains non-profit organisations. And as a consequence, they're able to develop projects that progress and grow organically over a long period of time, which helps to generate trust but also accountability within those communities. They also offer volunteering opportunities for schools and university groups as well to get involved and to help to fundraise. But their work has been really impactful, and in particular in East Africa and Nepal, their teams have really sought to eliminate poverty and inequality by promoting that search for sustainability and fair trade within the context of purpose and what that means. And as a consequence, they really have raised the life expectancy and life quality of communities in the parts of the world in which they've worked. But crucially, they've demonstrated the transformative power of tourism and the impact that can have on people and on the places in which they work. So two really good examples, I feel, of organisations which really embrace purpose, that collective purpose, and have such potential to work towards a more transformative, less harmful kind of tourism. Another example, which I'm sure some of you are quite familiar with, is the work of the destination management organisation Wonderful Copenhagen. And they had a strategy a few years ago now where they declared the end of tourism as we know it. And what this strategy was all about was putting people at the centre of its vision and imagines a destination's future which is co-created by residents, industry and visitors. The emphasis of this was in a response to the impact tourism can have on the quality of life for residents, whether that's for better or for worse. And as European cities like Barcelona and Venice struggle with increasing visitor numbers caused by mass tourism, destinations like Copenhagen sought a solution which can provide a net benefit to locals and visitors alike. So what they did at Wonderful Copenhagen is they declared localhood for everyone and encouraged its visitors to the destination to think of themselves as temporary residents. So rather than taking from the destination, it's about giving something back and contributing to the destination instead. And this shift in Copenhagen can help visitors to add value to community instead of asking permanent residents to exchange their quality of life for money. And there were strategic pillars that they devised that helped to inform policy making across the destination in declaring localhood for everyone. And it's been fairly successful in changing that mindset, and again embraces that notion of collective purpose, people working in collaboration across a range of different areas within that destination. And then closer to home, we've been working on a particular project in York that focuses on purpose and purposeful tourism, that explores the conditions required to facilitate public policy innovation to achieve social change. And this really requires, I would argue, a shift from tourism being a cause for affecting greater economic prosperity to one that is founded upon shared purpose. So back to those initial themes and ideas from earlier in the presentation. Shared purpose requires engagement across all parts of the community to create meaningful change. And what our research in York is specifically looking at exploring is how, through shared purpose, communities can, in cities like York, tourist historic cities like York, build sustainable models of tourism and sustainable models of tourism engagement. And York's quite an interesting case study to explore, which and again, I'm sure many of you are familiar. York was born, industrial revolution in York was based on chocolate and the railways. And as that declined quite dramatically during the latter part of the previous century, tourism emerged as a substitute industry in the city. It's now York's biggest economic sector. York is a major heritage visitor destination. And prior to the pandemic, York was welcoming an estimated 8.4 million visitors a year, who spend on average £765 million in total. The sector supports 20,000 jobs, and is really important for the York's economy and the investment that it brings. But for a long time, York and tourism and its residents haven't really welcomed each other very well. York residents would wear T-shirts that would say "I'm not a tourist," and they would give wrong directions on purpose because they were annoyed at the way in which the city centre was being transformed into this product for consumption. And there's been quite a lot written about that and about the impact tourism has had on York. And for a long time, the city authority, the DMO, in whatever guise the DMO has been in, has sought to try and manage that relationship between residents, the industry, and the stakeholders involved. But arguably, the more unique a place is, the more sought after it will be. And York's historic environment has been part of its success. Despite a reluctance to market the city back in the 70s and 80s, people still came. And that's grown significantly because of the historic fabric, the medieval street pattern, all that comes with the city centre. Capitalism has transformed spaces, urban or otherwise, into commodities for exchange. And we see this very much in the city centre of York. And for those who live in tourist historic cities like York, they become the possessions of tourism. So in the case of York, it is urban human life that's fallen victim to the environmental harms of tourism policy that promotes hyper-consumption and the social cultural harm that this produces. So our project in York, we're working on, looks to critically explore the governance and policy making in the city within the context of tourism, with the aim to appreciate how harm is socially and historically constructed by exploring the impact of globalization on diverse communities, but specifically focus on tourist historic destinations. To understand the impact of this, we're interrogating the wider social, political and economic processes that govern policymaking in the city, specifically related to tourism. And we're doing this through considering models of engagement and exploring how communities can reclaim their voice to build sustainable and purposeful models of engagement in tourist spaces. We're currently in the data collection mode. We're sort of out interviewing and meeting various people across the city at the moment. And I think what's interesting is the advisory board has been created, but that's still very much a private sector dominant voice. And engaging local resident communities in having an active influence is something to be explored further. But hopefully, by later this autumn, we should have some initial findings to be able to share about models of engagement and what that looks like and what that means. I also think, though, and I strongly believe, that tourism education is at the forefront of all of this, as we as educators, as practitioners, critically seek ways to enhance tourism practice. And it's through our radical actions that we can challenge the collapse of biodiversity and the silencing of host communities affected by the various impacts of tourism, some of which we've touched upon today. We all must honestly and critically reflect upon our own values and the values that are informing our practice, and respond radically to that, and consider ways in which, for our own practice, whether that's within industry or within education, we can promote more purposeful travel, purposeful work, and purposeful forms of tourism engagement. And that leads me on to talk a bit more about TEFI. So as some of you know, TEFI is a network of educators, researchers, practitioners, and community members who seek that progressive approach to tourism education and research. The network is an open network. It hasn't got a membership structure, or it's not a closed group. It's an open network committed to a form of tourism that is both sustainable and just, and that values people and planet alongside the economic outcomes as well. And as a network, our ambition is to move beyond business as usual, exploitative industrial approaches to tourism, and to seek to create spaces for knowledge co-creation between industry and practice, and look upon education as a two-way link that moves us towards evidence-based tourism policy, planning, and placemaking. And since taking over as co-chair alongside Carla, we've been working since the new year to create more of a focus for TEFI and think about how we can engage with the wider network. So that started back in January with 2 re-envisioning workshops that were facilitated by Professor Diane Dredge to explore the role of TEFI and the ambitions and goals it's setting itself going forward over the next sort of short term, medium term, and longer term. As part of that, we're rebranding ourselves. The logo here is very old and tired, so we're looking at a new website and a bit of a rebrand, but also how to keep the conversation going. I think one of the challenges for TEFI was that they would have their annual or biannual conferences, and so much energy and enthusiasm would come out of those events, but then as we went back to our universities or organisations, that momentum will be lost. So it's how we keep the conversations going in between those major conferences. So as part of that, we've launched a series of what we've called power hours, which are taking place monthly. They're online with various topics depending on what we've got coming up, to explore areas, to share practice, to share ideas, to have those conversations. Some of them are themed, some of them are just an opportunity to come together with a cup of coffee or gin and tonic and just catch up with people. And they're at various times to try and capture different time zones. So our last one was actually last week. The one for May was last week, but it was midnight UK time, so it was not great timing for us, but it helped to keep some time zones. So our next conference announcement is coming out very soon. It will be online again, but if you want to get involved with the network, please let me know. We can add you to our mailing list. We've got we sort of sharing things around through Trinet, but also got a particular mailing list as well. So if you'd like to be involved in those power hours, then or join the network, then please do get in touch. And I think that's as far as I wanted to go. Thank you very much again for having me this afternoon. I really do appreciate it.